Welcome to the Freedom School, an opportunity to learn about history-bending campaigns and initiatives from across the globe. We are inspired by what the Freedom Schools meant during the Civil Rights Movement in the United States, a place for alternative learning for African Americans, a safe space to discover suppressed stories of courage under oppression, the wisdom of culture, and the determination of many to make the impossible seem inevitable. This Freedom School is part of Spadework, a program that seeks to nurture and develop a new generation of organizers committed to those same principles. Learning about the historical context of these important campaigns and movement initiatives allows us to reflect more deeply about our own current challenges. Inquiring and learning is part of the organizer's Spadework. Organizers are inspired by the people we meet and the stories we share with each other. We also know that this journey never ends, and along the way we find joy and satisfaction in practicing the proven organizing adage. Listen with an open heart to the lessons others have learned and apply what you think makes sense. Then reflect, rinse, repeat. If you are inspired by what you hear, or if you want to support the development of a new generation of organizers through Spadework, then consider making a small contribution to keep this going. Go to www.spadework.school/donate right now, or simply click on the link on the chat screen. Enjoy your time together. Adelante.
Hola a todos, les intérpretes hoy yo, Constance y Ale. Queremos anunciar que vamos a ofrecer interpretación en inglés y español durante la reunión de hoy. Entonces, para los presentadores de hoy, pueden ayudarnos hablando a ritmo moderado, voz alta y claramente. Para los participantes, por favor, no sufren en silencio. Si la interpretación no está funcionando o si están teniendo otras dificultades técnicas, déjenos saber en el chat para poder asistirles. En un momento se encenderá la interpretación de Zoom y verán un globo en la parte baja de sus pantallas con un mensaje sobre la interpretación de idiomas. Hagan clic en el globo y eligen el idioma en el que les gustaría participar y escuchar durante esta sesión. Si nos acompaña a través de su celular o tablet, pueden hacer clic en los 3 puntos en la esquina derecha de la parte baja de su pantalla. Elija interpretación de idiomas y después selecciona su idioma. Asegúrense de hacer clic en finalizado y estarán listos.
Hello, everyone. The interpreters today would be myself, Ale, and Constance. We will be offering interpretation from English to Spanish in today's session. For those presenting today, you can help us by speaking at a moderate pace, loudly and clearly. If you see us go on camera doing this, we ask that you slow down. For all participants, please don't suffer in silence. If the interpretation is not working or you're having technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat so that either one of us can help you. In a moment, Zoom interpretation will be turned on and you'll see a globe on the lower part of your screen with a message about language interpretation. Click on the globe and select the language which you'd like to participate and listen during this session. If you're joining us through a smartphone or a tablet, you can click on the 3 dots on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, select language interpretation, and then choose your language. Make sure to click on done and you should be all set. And we can turn on the interpretation now.
Okay. Thank you, Ale and Constance. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Alex Muhammad. I'm born and raised in Chicago, and I currently work as the political training director for the Mass Liberation Project. In today's conversation, I'll also be serving as co-host for our Freedom School session. Connected to Freedom School, we have recently launched Spadework, which is an 8-month intensive campaign development and training support cohort for organizations and organizers on the front lines responding to systemic racism. And we're super excited to be here, and welcome to Freedom School. I'm going to pass it over to my co-host, Larry.
Thank you, Alex. My name is Larry Solomon. My regular full-time job is I'm a teacher at San Francisco State University's Department of Race and Resistance Studies, which is part of the historic College of Ethnic Studies, where I teach, among other classes, community organizing and movement history. So movement history is a really, special part of, kind of my heart. I've been a longtime trainer too in organizing, where we do things like this. We do freedom schools, but we also try to make sure that the organizers of today have a sense of what came before them. We're often, kind of confronted with that old quote about history, about the importance of learning history is that we don't repeat the mistakes from the past. I want to put a little twist on that, because I think history is important to, obviously, to not repeat the same mistakes, learn those lessons, but also learn the inspiring lessons, the lessons of what maybe we can borrow from the past, what we can maybe learn from and be inspired from in past struggles, especially stories of movement struggle. So it's in that spirit that the Freedom School is here, and we're going to be here for the next couple of months. This is week 3 of our 10-week series. I'm going to just talk a little bit about what Freedom School is, and sort of kind of introduce what the process is going to look like today, and then I'll throw it back to Alex, and she can introduce our special guest today. We have a really great show today for you. So I wanted to make sure that we understand that Freedom School comes out of the civil rights movement in a lot of ways, a historic part of the civil rights movement in the Deep South in particular. Freedom schools existed for literacy tests, to combat literacy tests, combat some of the oppressive sort of forces in the South. And, brainchild of the SNCC organizers, who decided to set up freedom schools, not just to teach literacy, not just to teach basic sort of, ABCs on government, so folks could better register to vote and so forth, but really to kind of understand systems as wide-ranging as white supremacy and capitalism and so forth. And so I think freedom schools kind of emerge out of that tradition, and since then have kind of evolved into something where we talk about basic organizing skills, but we couple it with stories of struggles, inspiring stories of struggle, stories that may be 50, 60 years old, stories that may be just a few years old. In fact, today's lesson will come from about 3 decades ago, and next week's story will be just from a few years ago. So we're really trying to keep this thing flexible. I should also say that Spadework and Freedom School are, we have a team, Lisa Castellanos, Alex Mohammed, myself, our tech team, and of course, Francis Calpatura, who you heard in that introduction. Many of you know Francis. Francis, kind of brought a lot of us together, and it has his own kind of take on what the point of Freedom Schools are. And you heard him there in that clip. I just want to reiterate, amplify the point. He said, learning from past victories and mistakes and being inspired by those efforts is critical for the development of organizers. I think that's what Freedom School is all about. And so learning from those lessons and mistakes, we'll try to lift up some of those lessons and mistakes and inspirations today in this discussion on the history of the Justice for Janitors campaign, particularly in Silicon Valley. A program note real quick, we are live streaming on YouTube. YouTube is also where Spadeworks Freedom School has a channel. So these episodes, these sessions will live there. You can always check them out because they'll be archived there, but we are live streaming. In a minute, we're going to bring on our main guest, our main presenter, Salvador Chava Bustamante, who is going to talk about the Justice for Janitors campaign and lay out that context, and again, some of the big strategies and tactics, as well as the overall lessons. We'll ask Chava just to come on in a second. We are devoting a pretty good portion of the second half of this discussion today to addressing your questions. So I want to really encourage everyone here today. If you've got burning questions, please let them loose in that chat function. Make sure we hear from them. We have a good team here at Freedom School who's going to sort through some of the questions. We'll try to give as many of them the light of day as possible, but really use that chat function. We've also asked a couple of respondents who are part of Spadework, who are some of the current organizer interns with Spadework, the participants who are also going to share their reflections on what Chava has talked about today, connected to the current work, which is, after all, the point. And then finally, before we close today, we will preview the coming sessions, the coming episodes of the Freedom School. So I want to kind of throw it back to Alex, but I just want to remind people to use your chat to throw questions into the mix, because we really look forward to those. Alex, you want to introduce Chava?
Yes, thanks, Larry. So super excited. Today we have Salvador Chava Bustamante, who has worked as to promote labor, human, and civil rights for Latino immigrants in California for over 40 years. For 19 years, Chava served as the first vice president of the Service Employees International Union, Local 1877. And he currently works as a full-time volunteer executive director of LUNA, which is Latinos United for a New America, based in San Jose. Thank you so much for joining us today. Where are you calling us from?
Calling from San Jose.
Good morning. Nice. Yes. Can you tell us, before we super jump in, a little bit about the work that you're doing now and what you're up to?
Well, I mean, I retired as a full-time volunteer executive director of LUNA back in February, but I still continue to work with the organization. I'm the treasurer of the board, and so I deal with all the financial aspects of the organization, help with grants and those things. I'm also active in other campaigns. Right now, we are working with the vendors at the flea market. The flea market will be closing in a year or two, and more than 750 families will be displaced from their businesses. And so I am working with other community leaders trying to find alternatives for those vendors. And I'm also part of a group called the Latinos in Action 2020. This is a group of Latinos that we formed a couple of years ago, just in preparation for the 2020 election campaign. And so that is, part of what I'm doing right now.
Thank you. Just a quick note from our interpreters to just a reminder for us to slow down. But yeah, I want to kick it to Larry.
I love how Chava said, I'm retired from my work as executive director, and then went into like 4 full-time jobs, which is what a lot of organizers sound like after they quote unquote retire.
That's what my wife says.
Like, you're supposed to retire. So before I open the floor to Chava and his presentation, I want to just remind people again, use the chat function, ask great questions. We will try to address as many of them as we can. And without further delay, here's Chava Bustamante on the history of justice for janitors in Silicon Valley. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Larry, and thank you, Alex, for the introduction. But I also want to thank Francis for giving me the honor and inviting me to this, to be a speaker in this on this panel. I, share Francis' belief that, as organizers, we have the responsibility to make sure that we train the next generation of organizers. So the fight for justice, for good jobs, for housing, for quality education can continue. And so I'm very proud to be here today. I'm about, I'm 69 years old, and so my memory is not what it used to be. So what I did is I lifted some facts from the internet about J for J. And the first thing, that I would say is that Just for Janitors is the name of a movement that started in the late 1980s by the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, in response to the low wages and almost non-existent health care coverage that the janitors received back then. Justice for Janitors includes more than 200,000 janitors in at least 29 cities in the United States. The members of J for J fight for better wages, better conditions, improved healthcare, and full-time opportunities. The structure used by SEIU for its Just for Janitors campaign has been widely recognized for its been very innovative and successful. The Justice for Janitors uses the top-down model of organizing, in which they organize workers based on geographical areas rather than just their work site. Actually, the internet says that it uses a top-down model, but I have a different view of that. Having been a part of the campaign, I would say that it's more of a top-down. I say this because later on in the conversation, when we get to the lessons, I would, talk about this more as a lesson that I learned of something that it's important for labor unions that are trying to improve the working conditions of their members. In any way, this structure improves the visibility of workers by grouping them together. The structure used by SEIU for its Just for Janitors campaigns has been widely recognized for its success. Just for Janitors campaigns often use strong militant tactics to get their points across. One of the those tactics that I remember, we used to organize weeks of rage that were, for a week, we will go crazy every day of the week. We'll show up in different cities in Silicon Valley and mess with traffic, mess with everything we could mess, just to make life difficult for everyone. Not because we wanted to accommodate people, but when we say that no justice, no peace, we mean it. It is important that people and communities understand that as long as workers do not have the recognition and the benefits and what they need to live a decent life, there could not be no peace in our communities. The Justice for Janitors campaign, sends trained organizers to local unions in order to organize campaigns. It actually started in Denver in 1988, and then it moved to Los Angeles. Back then, the janitors were working for large real estate owners and become victims of competition and lower wage. The large real estate companies that dominate the industry contracted the cleaning services of janitorial contractors. These contractors were in high competition with each other and therefore cut wages for their cleaning services. In the janitorial industry, which is a contracted industry, they have what is called the lowest bid. And those who can do the job for less money and with less people, they are the ones who get the contracts. So This was the situation when I was hired to work in a contract campaign for SEIU Local 77 in San Jose in February of 1988. So before I go on, I would like to ask Matthew if he can show a short 6-7 minute video of the strike in Century City in 1990, which became one of the most iconic, videos and images of the Just for Janitors in the United States and across the world. So, Matthew, if you can please show the video.
For the janitors of Los Angeles, this was supposed to be just another morning.
An injury to one, an injury to all, an injury
They would sing, they would march, some would go to jail. Like 100 times before, they would be aggressive, militant, but non-violent.
What do we want? What do we want?
And the media would record another chapter in what had become a classic struggle. Men and women making less than $5 an hour up against the giant multinational corporations that control the real estate and office cleaning industries in our country.
It's like all janitors. Nobody survives with the $4.25 that we make for 8 hours. We're forced to do other work during the day. It has to be this way because otherwise we won't achieve anything with $4.25. We have to pay for rent, food, bills, and help our families. That's why all janitors have 2 jobs.
Because these days' events had been cleared with the Los Angeles Police Department, the 200 striking janitors had been joined by hundreds of community supporters, among them dozens of children, labor officials, and politicians. Their destination? Century City, a glitzy office park that is home to some of the biggest television and movie companies in America. But when the marchers reached the entrance to Century City, they found themselves trapped in a movie, a very bad movie.
Why can't we march on the sidewalk? There's other people marching on the sidewalk right there. We have a legal right to march on the sidewalk, and we're going to march on the sidewalk. We're not going to block streets. Why is that?
Twice the demonstrators tried to submit to arrest. Twice they were beaten. Then, when union organizers ordered a cautious retreat, the police moved in with a vengeance. Stunned by the police attack, the marchers were barely able to scramble to sanctuary in a nearby neighborhood. 50 of them would go to jail. But more than 60 demonstrators would end up in hospitals and emergency rooms. Among them were 2 pregnant women, one of whom would miscarry.
Then one of them pushes me like this, and I fell on top of the rest, and they got up from under me. And then they started kicking me, and so I screamed in English, "Wait a minute," and I said, "Don't hit me." I was bent over. I wasn't stealing, I wasn't carrying drugs, or anything of that sort. I'm simply asking for an increase in salary. I'm not violating the law in any way. I want to survive in this country legally. I'm not robbing a bank or doing anything wrong. I'm simply asking for an increase for the work that I do. And the policeman hit me on my back and my hip, and he shoved me as though I were garbage. He hit me awful. We were marching in front, and the police came and started hitting all of us.
What do you think about all this? I think it's outrageous that when people are being killed all over the city, that the cops are beating up poor workers to defend billionaire landlords. Folks want to move back, want to try and move the bus, we don't want anybody to get hurt.
Thank you, Matthew. That was the situation for janitors, not only in Los Angeles, but all over the United States. And I would say that was the situation for many, workers and union members back in the late 80s. For years, the labor movement in the United States had stopped organizing, and the result was that loss of membership, contracts that did not do any justice to the workers. Full markets were overrun by non-union contractors, and that was the case when I came to work for Local 1870s. Local 77 was at the time in San Jose. Local 77 had jurisdiction over San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. We represented about 1,800 janitors who worked under 2 master agreements that expired in December of 1987. It was February of 1988 when I came to work for the local. We were in the second month of the contract campaign, and really there was no hope that we would be able to successfully renegotiate that contract. So 2 months later, and due to the failure of the leadership to involve the members, and the members' discontent with the lack of effective representation, they didn't support the union efforts to defend the contracts. And in May of that year, 1988, we settled for a disastrous 3-year contract that contained no increases for the first 2 years, a pension freeze for the 3 years. And we went from a 3-wage tier to tiers to 12 tiers. So meaning that people who started in the first, people only had to work 3 years in order to go from the first tier to the third tier to the top wage. Now they will have to wait 12 years. All in all, it was a painful defeat for the union. Later that year, we decided that we needed to reconstruct the union, and to start trying different strategies to improve, our members' benefits and working conditions. And one of the first things that we did was to merge the 3 janitorial locals in Santa Clara, San Mateo, and the East Bay into one, and elected a leader that reflected the face of the members who were about 80% Latinos. And I want to make a pause here to remember Brother Mike Garcia, who was the first president of Local 1877. That's what we became after this merger. And Mike, was the leader in the face of J4J, Just for Janitors in the Bay Area and Sacramento, and then in Los Angeles for many, many years until his death a few years ago. But in spite of us, merging the strength of the 3 locals together, the situation at the bargaining table did not improve much. The wage increases were minimal. The pension got unfrozen, but the contributions were laughable. I mean, we just, the contributions were a penny an hour, and we agreed to that simply because we didn't want members who had already some pension accumulated lose what they had accumulated until then. The worst part is that a large majority of our members did not have access to medical benefits. And the contracts excuse that they were being killed by the competition. They said that they could not survive in an industry that awarded contracts to the lowest bid if they had to pay better wages and benefits and compete with contractors who only had to pay minimum wage and no benefits. So that's when the janitors in Los Angeles started to attract attention because of their J4J campaign and what happened in Century City. I'm talking about the video that you just saw. The new leadership of the union decided that it was time for us to start kicking some butt too here in Silicon Valley, and we started our J4J campaign and targeted this area. We picked a contractor, Shine Building Maintenance, that was not very large as janitorial companies go, only about 150 workers. But they had what people in the industry call a trophy account. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about Apple computers. So we went after them relentlessly. When we started leaning on Apple computers to put pressure on Shine, they claimed that they were not responsible for what happened to the workers, that they didn't work for them. We needed to go to Shine, and they essentially washed their hands and said that they were not responsible for their economic situation. So what we did is we started a community coalition, the Silicon Valley Justice Coalition. I think that was the name. And this coalition was essential in our efforts to explain to the community how Apple was taking advantage of these workers and affecting their lives, and not taking responsibility for making sure that they received a decent wage and medical benefits, and how that affected our communities. And so when we started shaming Apple computers, we did follow them everywhere, and with their business relationships, putting pressure everywhere they had anything, everywhere where they had anything to any business interest. they started to put pressure on Shine building maintenance. And then finally, they told Shine building maintenance that they had to settle with the union, otherwise they were going to hire a different contractor. And that's when we were able to negotiate a contract with Shine building maintenance. And that was really the beginning of a profound changes for the janitors in the Bay Area. Within a few years, we went from 30% that we dominated in the industry to about 65%. From 1,800 workers that we represented, we expanded our membership to about 35 to 4,000 janitors in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. And we signed our first contract with Shine in 1992. So it was a campaign that took about 18 months, but it was successful. Then in between 1992 and 1994, after the Shine victory, like I said, we organized at least another 35 to 4,000 janitors in the Valley. By 1994, we also organized the arena workers in San Jose. And it was like everywhere and every target that we picked, it wouldn't last long because they already had the lesson that we had given to them in terms of the Apple campaign. Nobody wanted to go through the same thing. So client companies like Hewlett Packard, like IBM, and other big high-tech companies, they didn't want to have to deal with hundreds of people, marching in the streets, dragging their names and their, reputation, and also getting a lot of pressure from people in the community. So by 1995, we decided to moved to Sacramento, and we launched an organizing drive against Somers building maintenance. And we took over the janitorial and allied division of Local 22. So this was the first expansion of Local 1877 outside the Bay Area. And in 1996, after a month-long strike, we were able to merge all the locals, all the master agreements that we had in the Bay Area, 3 master agreements into one. And this was really something that that was very important for us as a union, because we were spending our resources, the resources of the union. It was like we were perennially involved in negotiations. The contracts expired, at the end of the year, and we were negotiating, 1 year 18, 1 year 77, San Mateo, and another year San Jose. And, we could not dedicate any other resources to organize new companies or new members. So in 1977, one of the important things that happened with when we were able to merge the 3 contracts is that we were able to get health and welfare benefits for about 10,000 members in the Bay Area and their families. And that to me was one of the biggest victories that Just for Janitors was able to achieve in the Bay Area. That after 6 years of struggle, of organizing and merging contracts and creating chaos, we were able to finally achieve medical benefits for all of our members in the Bay Area. And so then in 1997, we merged with the Allied Division of Local 399 in Los Angeles, and we became a statewide union. We became the second largest building service local in the United States. So this was for me a very, the second transforming experience in my life as an organizer. The first one was with the United Farm Workers. I was a farm worker for 12 years of my life. I came to the United States in 1968, and in 1970, I got involved with the UFW, and for the next 9 years, I was a member and grassroots leader, officer of the union when we were able to negotiate contracts for the first time in 1976. And so that experience was the first one that really transformed my life and woke up my conscience in terms of, forced me to think about what was my role in this society and what I needed to do with my life. And that's when I decided to become an organizer. The second, important experience came with working for Just for Janitors. I learned very important lessons, with Just for Janitors. I was saying in the beginning that, the top-down model was something that I didn't like in the beginning because I thought that it was, it went against democracy. I thought that the workers needed to make that decision themselves if they wanted to be represented. But later on, I, really learned that if a labor union is responsible for improving the lives of their members, that sometimes you have to organize in spite of your members and in spite of the workers. Because if we, stay concentrate on giving good representation and do not invest in going out and organize new membership, new markets, then eventually those gains that you have achieved for them will start crumbling, like it happened back in the late 80s. And so for me, the model of Just for Janitors, it's a good model, and it picks an area that needs to be improved. The way that we picked Sacramento, for example, where there was only one union company and the rest of the market was not organized. And so after we went in, we were able to. It took about 3 years for us to reorganize that market. But eventually we were able to succeed, and now the market is a union market. And that has a repercussion in terms of the kind of agreements that you can negotiate with the contractors. And this benefits the members and benefits the communities. The other lesson that I learned is that the workers' fight, goes beyond the work side. Workers do not exist in isolation. Workers are, when your shift is done, you go back to your community, and the problems that those communities have, accessible as housing, education for your children, or issues that affect you, and that the issues that affect the workers also affect the communities. So the communities have to work together with workers, and workers need to work with communities in order to improve everybody's lot. So one of the things I was mentioning that Just for Janitors did successfully was to create ties and and also work with community groups and making sure that the message about the situation of the janitors had repercussions in their communities and the areas where these people live. And so it was everybody's responsibility to make sure that we help those workers improve so our communities could improve too. The other lesson that I think that I learned is that long-lasting changes do not happen overnight. In our case, in order for us to go from having just a few janitors have access to medical benefits to covering all the membership of a union took about 6 years. And we had to merge contracts, we had to merge locals, and we had to consolidate the strength of all these and the resources of this large area to work and to fight as one, so we would be able to achieve important changes like the change I was mentioning. Medical benefits for this many people you do not get every day, and this is not something that happens very often. And it has happened in the and these are lessons that some unions have learned. The latest one that I've seen is the example of Unite Here in Silicon Valley, where basically using the same model that Just for Janitors applied back in the late 80s. They've been using, and they had been organized and successfully. The latest success that they had was to organize the cafeteria workers at Google. 2,500 workers. It's an important gain for labor. So the last lesson that I would say I was able to learn with working with the J4J is that the labor unions need to seriously invest in organizing. You cannot organizing campaigns take a lot of resources, and it takes a lot of commitment. You cannot just go in and run a campaign and then get out and leave, right? Because things won't change like that. So you need to really invest in multi-year campaigns that are going to not just organize workers, but to change the ability of the union to negotiate better things for those members, for those workers in that particular industry. And so those are the lessons that I would say for me were important to learn working with the Just for Janitors campaign. So Larry, Alex.
Well, I really appreciate this history lesson, Chava. So much material to go on. We've got some really great questions already brewing in the chat. I want to offer a couple observations and toss it to Alex, who's going to talk about the respondents part of this. But I just want to remind people this is a history pretty recent. The clip you saw is from 1990, the infamous Century City march. But what we're talking about here is evolution of the labor movement, the evolution of strategies and tactics, and so what I'm struck by some of my kind of obvious takeaways, I think, are these lessons that you just kind of laid out. One obvious lesson, and this is the one that, it's like a running theme already in the Freedom School series, is that the lasting changes don't get accomplished overnight. The long kind of struggle of history. We've used the metaphor of the river before, but also just kind of like these campaigns don't work in isolation with one another, and so they build upon, and then they create impact. And so I just wanted to kind of remind folks of that lesson, as well as the important lesson that you were talking about with the struggle to kind of figure out how to use resources better, and that resources and energy and all this time is being devoted to negotiating one contract after another, and the resources to organizing were given short shrift. So that was really sort of having to remind yourselves that organizing really here is the key if we're going to sustain anything long term. So that was really great. I think I want to just explain again how this next portion is going to work. We're going to kind of offer up some of the questions from the chat, some of the questions people have about things that you've mentioned, and maybe some things that were brought up by things that you mentioned. I've got a number of questions myself too. I'm going to ask Alex though also just to explain who we're going to hear from pretty soon in the respondents, and then I want to come back to the chat questions.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. And thank you so much, Chava. I'm also super excited to jump into the question and answer portion. I have a ton of questions myself. But in addition to taking questions from participants and viewers, like Larry said, we also have a couple folks from our Spadework who are going to share their reflections on what they've heard and insights that they drew from this experience that feels relevant to their work today. And the respondents that we have that will share those reflections are Samantha Masters, Jazz Espinosa, and Selena Herrera. And then, yeah, I'll kick it back to you, Larry.
Okay, so Chava, if you could please indulge us with some responses to these questions. We got a lot of good ones. I want to start by just asking you to clarify first what you were talking in the beginning about the top-down model versus the bottom-up model. The top-down model, maybe, which might be typical otherwise in labor organizing, versus this bottom-up model, which maybe relied on more community engagement. Can you talk more about that J for J kind of philosophy of bottom-up organizing?
Yeah, when I talk about bottom-up or top-down, I'm talking about campaigns that start with a bottom-up campaign. For me, it's when the desire to organize comes from the workers themselves, work site. They start talking amongst themselves and they say, we need a union, and they approached, a union that will represent the industry that they work in. And then, they organize for an election, and then the union is in. A top-down model, to me, is when the union decides that we need to improve this particular region or area. And we then choose, like, in our case with 1877, we were the ones who said, we need to go to Sacramento. Sacramento is an area where most of the janitorial companies that we have in the Bay Area also work there, but they have no union contracts. There's only one, so we need to go there and organize. And so, to my knowledge, the workers in Sacramento never called the union and then they said, hey, 1877, we need you to come to Sacramento and organize. And so we did it because we needed to make sure that the union contractors that we had in the Bay Area, that they understand that wherever they went, we were going to follow them and make sure that they would not be able to operate double-breasted, meaning that they could have union contracts here, but in this region, they could operate non-union. So that they, had to be union everywhere they went. And that was the, it was a way of protecting the improvements that we had gained in a particular region and not have the threat of non-union contractors always, trying to get into our markets. So that to me is the difference between a top-down and a bottom-up model.
And I asked that question also just to clarify something you mentioned earlier, and a few people in the chat have asked for clarification as well. When you said that the union is responsible and that you have to organize in spite of the workers, shouldn't workers, one of the chat questions asks, shouldn't workers be part of the organizing structure so that their voices, their concerns are what's driving the issues being organized around? I mean, that's kind of what you said, but
no. I mean, and I understand, and I'm aware of what I said. I mean, that could sound anti-democratic for some people, and to be honest with you, it is, right? But what I'm saying here is that unions have a responsibility that they cannot advocate. And the responsibility is to always do whatever they need to do to make sure that they do the best for their members. And the best thing that a labor union can do for its members is organize, right? And so sometimes, like in the case of Just for Janitors, you go into a market and a worker can say, I don't need the union. So, don't talk to me about the union. And then, you don't have all the support that you need, right? To, yes, of course, you try to, one of the first things you do when you start an organizing campaign is to try to gain the support of the workers. Mm-hmm. But what if a majority of the workers, right, has been brainwashed and they think that, they're fine without a union, right? Yes, I mean, they will take the benefits of having labor agreement bring with it, but either they're afraid or they simply are too close to the employer, to the boss, that they don't want to make waves. And so in those situations, right, I mean, we need to go in. I mean, sometimes, a lot of the times we had to struggle with the members, with our members, the members of the union who demanded that the resources be spent on representation. Mm-hmm. And there was a fight, right, that went on for years to transform the union from a service model union into an organizing model union. And, and sometimes we had to go against the will of those members who demanded that the resources be spent on representation. Because that's what all unions did, right? They concentrated on representation and they forgot about organizing, and the results, we saw what happened in the late 80s, not just with the janitorial industry, but with unions everywhere, mm-hmm. The auto industry and other unions.
I appreciate that response. I have another question about the membership, but I'm going to throw it to Alex to ask a question, and then we'll kind of continue this.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. I wanted to say this earlier. I know that the video that you shared, Chava, can be a difficult one to watch, but I appreciate you sharing that because it just, was the reality, and it's still the reality today when folks are standing up to power for, civil, human, and labor rights. But yeah, so I'm also in the very tail end of reading Why David Sometimes Wins by Marshall Keynes, and obviously, right, you were there, a part of that, and I'm super curious to hear, given your experience in farm labor organizing, what were some of the core strategies that you feel like you took from that movement and that work, and brought into the fight and into the strategy around justice for janitors. And I think connected to that, some of what you were just sharing in response to Larry's question, really what was the relationship between unions like? Because I also know that that was a big lesson coming from the farm workers movement as well.
Well, I would say that one of the main tactics that we adopted from the United Farm Workers was the use of nonviolence. Be aggressive, be militant, but don't be stupid. Don't provoke violence, right? Be able to retreat, right? Make your point, and then retreat, and don't have people be beat or arrested if there's no need for that. Was one thing. The other, I think, it's the ability to connect with the general public about the plight of the janitors, which is something that the United Farm Workers did through the boycott. The strikers didn't win the contracts in the Leno, right? What won those contracts was the boycott and the ability of the union to communicate the sacrifices of the workers and to be able to have workers themselves talk about their needs. And this is something that we also took those lessons from that experience, right? Every city council meeting, every meeting with client companies, every community meeting that we went, we made sure that it was not Chava, that it was not the organizers who were talking about what was going on, but that it was the workers themselves talking about their situation and asking for specific help from people in the community or elected officials. Those are some of the things that I can think of right now, Alex.
Thank you. And then can you say a little bit about the relationship with other unions and Local 1877?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, solidarity is essential in all these fights. But it's even more important and necessary when you're fighting against the world. And so, I mean, it's sometimes it's hard because we all have different interests. Like, for example, I'm going to talk about the building trades and janitorial, right? Sometimes the needs of janitors and the relationships that janitors have with building owners or developers or real estate companies are different than people who work in the building trades industry. And so, being able to develop solidarity with those workers and those unions and get them involved in the fight was something that for us was really helpful, right? To have members of carpenters unions or building trades unions be together with us in the picket lines and speaking us with one voice in addressing elected officials or chieftains of the real estate industry was really important to have.
Yeah. I do have one more question and then I'll kick it to you, Larry. And then I think we're gonna open it up for some of the respondents. But yeah, Chava, I would love for you to say a little bit more about just kind of the role and the importance of race during this movement.
Yeah, I mean, when I started working for 77, was the number of the local in 1988. The leadership of the union was white, right? The president of the union was white. He had been the president of the union for I don't know how many years. They were having an internal fight where several members have tried to run against that leadership unsuccessfully, so the workers who were in their minority Latino did not identify with the leadership of the local. That was one issue that we had. Then the other issue that we had in terms of race was with the composition of the workforce in Oakland, where we had the African-American janitors who felt that they had were being displaced by the Latino janitors, which in fact, was happening. How do you, get those two, ethnic groups working together, fighting for improvements when they fighting against each other because they see the other as a threat. And so, in San Jose, I mean, the response wasn't that difficult to figure it out. So we knew that we needed a Latino to be elected to represent that membership. In Oakland, it was a different, situation, and the way that we ended up resolving it was by electing a vice president that was African American, and also electing at least half of the board to be made up of African American members who work in the janitorial industry. But the other thing that the other issue that we had was the issue of status. I mean, I would say that at least 50% of the people working in the janitorial industry in the Bay Area are undocumented. And so, I mean, but at least in two occasions, when we started the campaign with Apple computers, Shine called the Migra ICE on itself twice, right? So the leadership that we were able to develop, they got taken away. And so it was and continues to be a problem, right? I mean, for the union and for the workers, the issue of not having a status. Yeah.
Thank you. Larry?
Yeah, there's so much to talk about here. It reminds me a little bit of a recent conversation we were having in one of my classes, and it seems a little bit of a stretch, but bear with me for a second. We were talking about the history of tenants organizing in San Francisco and in other cities in California in the late 60s, early 70s. And a particular story, a well-known story about Filipinos organizing, Filipino and Chinese, mostly men organizing to defend their housing, basically in these residential hotels. It came up in one of the discussions from the readings that a lot of the older men who had settled in the cities after years of being farm workers, these are again mostly Filipino men, had been farm workers, had settled in the cities, had retired to these residential hotels, had in fact been militant organizers in decades past, years and years past. It's not like they were celebrated, it's not like they were well known, but they had experience confronting some of the biggest growers in California and dealing with the hostility of racism in California. So it reminds me that as you're talking about the membership of Justice for Janitors, it reminds me that membership was made up of all kinds of folks who were documented and undocumented, but people who were from Mexico and Central America. And I'm curious if you can talk about the political sophistication of some of the membership who had come from Central America in particular, but other places of the world where they had encountered, political conflict, and they had in fact maybe been organizers and activists who saw the Century City video that we saw, and it, was not that unfamiliar to the sort of conflict they had back home. To what extent was their history and experience valuable to the union, if you can talk on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say it was.
Sorry, really quickly, just one more note for us to slow down for interpretation.
Yeah, my apologies.
No problem.
It was, I would say, essential for the struggle in Los Angeles. Having the Salvadoreños and Nicaraguenses involved in that struggle was really key, because most of the leadership that I remember, the true leadership of the workers down there were either from El Salvador or Guatemala or other places in Central America, Hondurans, but mostly Salvadorans. And so we didn't have to struggle much with them. I mean, they understood the need for getting involved and the need to lead the fight and the need to be in front of the actions. And they, in fact, we relied on a lot of those leaders that we invited to come north to help us with contract campaigns and to explain what was going on, in their jurisdictions. So I would say that for the Los Angeles experience, I think that it was essential to have those, the role that those members played was more than important. It was very, very, it was key for the success of that, campaign in Los Angeles.
Great, thank you, Chava, for that response. And also a shout out to Berto in the chat for bringing sort of the spirit of that question, where he said our struggles are always interconnected. I thought that was valuable. And again, apologies for going too fast. Alex, I'll let you introduce some of the respondents who are going to contribute to this discussion.
Yes. So we have Jazz and Selena who are going to share with us today. Maybe we start with Jazz first, and then we'll go to Selena.
Thank you, Alex. Hi there. Thank you. Firstly, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. It's really powerful and moving to be able to talk to a movement leader and know a little bit more about the history. A little bit of context of me, I actually went to school out in the Bay Area, and I'm familiar with some of the organizing that's happening out there against the tech giants in particular, and Google in particular, and displacing folks out in San Jose. So it's particularly relevant and powerful for me to hear your perspective and the more of the historical organizing that's happened out there. And another context, I think, to frame my question that's coming up is that I've been privileged to be able to work and add to the organizing that's already been happening out here in North Georgia, in Gainesville, and particularly with the poultry workers. I've been working with Georgia Familias Unidas, an org that has already been doing work out here before I even got here. And it's been really interesting and powerful to work with the perspective of poultry workers who are actually majority often undocumented and working with what they call in Spanish papeles chuecos. Forged papers, as they say. And so it's been really interesting having to learn how to support the community members in the ways that they want to be supported, and the ways that don't put them at risk, and that actually achieve the goals without coming at the expense of their livelihood. Because folks out here live paycheck to paycheck, and Gainesville is living primarily under the poverty line. And so I wanted to frame that as context for my question that's coming up, which is unions, I think, are often framed as the best solution for workers' rights, but there are often barriers to unionizing, and that's something you've already spoken about, particularly immigration legal status. And that's where my interest lies, is that you mentioned earlier that it's not always, it's about sometimes about folks not wanting to make waves. But what I've noticed in the work just in the short term that I've been out here is that it's not always about not wanting to make waves. The desire is there, but rather not being able to survive the risk. And I use survive very strategically because it's about survival. And so my question is, what is your perspective on making unions accessible and unionizing, the act of unionizing, accessible to the undocumented community, especially added with the other barrier of language barrier, which is not just Spanish, but sometimes indigenous dialects where folks don't even speak Spanish sometimes. So I'm just curious to hear about your perspective on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you, Jess, for your questions. On the issue of accessibility, I would say that, you know, if unions are not willing to recognize that in order to really understand what are the needs and what are the circumstances of the people they're trying to organize, then you know, they're not doing a good job. So if the issue is language, then the unions, you know, have to have people who speak the language of the workforce they're trying to organize. If the issue is race, also, I mean, you know, you cannot have, you know, people identify with, you know, people of their that look like themselves. And so, I mean, if you don't have, you know, if you only have white organizers and you're trying to organize a labor force that is made up mostly of Filipinos or Mexicans or, you know, African Americans, you know, good luck, right? So unions need to invest wisely in the resources that they use to organize workers, okay? But on the issue of, you know, making waves, I think that, you know, we cannot be liberal in our approach to, you know, to saving people, right, or to not to put people at risk. You know, we need to be able to talk to people about the fact that, you know, organizing involves risks, and these are the risks, right? And I'm not going to make the decision for you, but you need to know that if, you know, if you don't get involved, if you're not willing to sacrifice or to, you know, take these risks, the improvements that you want for yourself and for your family may not, you know, be realized. And so, and allow people the freedom to decide by themselves whether or not they want to take that risk. You know, a lot of the times, I mean, especially with in community organizing, you know, and dealing with undocumented people, people always say that. I mean, no, let's not put Chava there because he's undocumented. Let Chava make that decision, you know. He's old enough, and you know, we need to trust that he has the ability to make those choices himself. You know, in other words, let's not decide for people. Let people decide by themselves what kind of risk, you know, or actions they're willing to take in order to improve their lives.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jazz, for your question, and Chava for your response. Selena?
Hello, everyone. My name is Selena Herrera. I'm the South Georgia Community Organizer here at GLAR, the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights. We focus on educating and organizing the Latino and immigrant community. I just wanted to make a connection to like what Mr. Chava was saying about how they went through 6 years of struggle and organizing to, finally having some kind of success, kind of connecting that with what the strategy that GLAR has, where if this outlet doesn't work, we're going to find other ways to do it, whether it's getting involved in the electoral process to move by demands and not candidates, or if it's like finding ways to navigate through the system, which takes us back to like the Not One More campaign that GLAR was involved in, where they would find ways to get people out of detention through like fiscal discretion. So I just wanted to connect that. I didn't really have a particular question that I was asking. I just wanted to connect the struggles that the Justice for Janitors and the struggles that GLAR goes through with the Latino and the immigrant communities. I think you can't separate workers' rights from immigrant rights. So it's really important to know that and to have that knowledge. And I just wanted to give a big thanks to Mr. Chava for presenting for us and for everybody in this space and continuing this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Selena. I mean, for your words, and also thank you for the commitment that your campaign, has in terms of, trying, different things. If this doesn't work, then, we do something different, right? But the important thing for me, I mean, in organizing is to never quit, right? To be serious about what you're doing, right? And understand that, some campaigns take longer than others. And, when we moved to Sacramento, we thought that simply because, we were so successful in Silicon Valley that we were just going to go there. And just by being there, everything was going to happen. It took 3 years for us to win our first campaign. And we had to, another lesson that we learned was that, every jurisdiction is different, right? The players are different, right? We had a Democratic establishment in Sacramento that was not very friendly to unions. I mean, even though the Democrats, say, in public that they support labor, when we needed real help from them, we couldn't find it. And so it took 3 years, double the time that it took us to go from 1,800 to 3,500 workers in Sacramento, in San Jose, Silicon Valley, to only have about half of the company, 500 workers in Sacramento. So.
Thank you. Larry, is it back to you?
Yeah, I don't know if we have another respondent, but let me just kind of get into another reflection that I have, just sort of one of the takeaways, and not really a question, but I just want to lift up one of the lessons, because this is what we're doing. We're looking at movement history lessons. It seems to me like one of the really cool things that you all figured out early on was to be nimble and adaptive. You know, in the past, and still today too, right? But like in the past, you had easier targets because it might have been a grower with a brand name. It might have been a company that everyone buys from. But, with the subcontracting that was going on, especially in the 80s, by the time you get to the real organizing in the 90s, it's like, who is your target? And I really like the idea that you all didn't make Shine building, the main target. It was Apple. Apple was the real goal there, and
Right.
Apple was the identifiable target. Maybe you can talk just briefly about like the challenge of selecting a target and how you all kind of went around the question of subcontracting, which can be a little, complicated for the public.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the reason we picked Shine, like I said, is because, I mean, in janitorial, they have, the contractors have what they call, A buildings, which are the trophy accounts, right? In this case was Apple computers. And Apple computers was basically the business that Shine had. I mean, it was big. It had plenty of janitors, and they had plenty of money. They had a reputation to care about. And they were connected everywhere in our community. So they had, John O'Shafer calls it the web of relationships, right? That's one of the exercises you do when you pick a target, right? And you analyze your target and see how they are connected to whom and what kind of pressure opportunities that present to you, right? And that's why we did it. They were connected politically, economically. They had, a spotless reputation, and they had a brand name that was, recognized around the world. So anything that threatened that shiny image, was going to produce results. And so, they have their yearly annual presentation when they present new products in San Francisco. We went there and invaded the Moscone Center and with leaflets and all kinds of, disrupted the whole thing, right? And they didn't like that, obviously, right? So we went to their shareholders meetings. And this is another way in which we work with other unions, Alex. SEIU didn't have, enough shares, to be invited to the shareholders meeting at Apple Computers. But, friends in the labor movement, other unions did. And so they, got access to those meetings. And we went in with a couple of janitors, and the janitors talked to the shareholders about, their situation inside of one of the richest corporations of the world, right? They were making billions of dollars, and these workers were not even making, minimum wage. And so, learning early, in the campaign, Larry, the connections that these targets have with the outside world, it's important because then that gives you multiple, ways of hitting them from, everywhere, and to a point where they say, no más, like Roberto Manos de Piedra Duran, no more, right? So they get tired, right? Because it affects them, right? Eventually. It took us 18 months with Apple computers, but they finally came to their knees and said, they told Shine, you either settle with the union or you're out of here.
Yeah.
But by that, when they decided to do that, they also decided to change the bidding system, right? Because in a contracted industry like this, like I said, every year it's, it works like a clock, right? Every year, almost in every account that the contractors have, the client companies, put the contracts out to bid. And they do it to compare prices, right? If you are in a market that is dominated by non-union, the bids that you're gonna get are all gonna be, low. The race is to the bottom, right, with non-union contractors, right? Those who can offer to do the job for less money and with less people will get the job invariably, right? But when the client companies change the rules a little bit and say, you have to provide certain benefits, then that creates a situation for non-union janitorial contractors to improve, to offer benefits. And even though they're not under contract, the industry continues to improve for the workers, right? Even though workers don't have a collective bargaining agreement, they start getting medical benefits, they start getting paid vacation, they start getting medical leave and things like that, right? So things improve for everyone, right? But that is the situation in every industry where the owners of the property or the factory, they decide that it's cheaper to subcontract the work instead of doing it themselves. Because if you work directly for Apple, an Apple janitor or maintenance person doesn't make $18 an hour. They make $25, $30 an hour. And so if you have 200 janitors cleaning your, it adds up. And so they don't want that, right? So, but when the market, the makeup of the market starts changing and it starts going from being dominated by non-union to a union-dominated market, then the attitude of the client companies like Apple Computers, IBM, starts to also change. And they understand that, there's a cost of doing business in this locality.
First of all, I love the reference to No Mas Roberto Duran. I mean, it also reminds us that in strategy and kind of thinking about how to change from one moment to a next, from maybe from a defeat to a victory, you've got to kind of study your opponent. You've got to make adjustments like Sugar Ray did in the second fight. Too much inside boxing there. I have a question from the chat, and then I'm going to throw it to Alex. But Elizabeth wants you to maybe talk about. By the way, the name of that coalition I think you were trying to come up with earlier, maybe this is the one, was Cleaning Up Silicon Valley Coalition.
That's it. Yeah.
And Elizabeth has a question about if you can talk about the week-long strike at Apple Computer and done by the coalition, and she mentions that the Apple Computer workers would spit on folks when they would leaflet. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then I'll throw it over to Alex.
I'm sorry, I got distracted. When you mentioned the name of the coalition, I remember that Lisa Castellanos was also part of the coalition. I think Sister Lisa is connected to the.
Yeah, Lisa, one of our Spadework folks. Yeah, she was our co-host last week and one of our folks. So she was asking if you could talk about that.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, if you could just talk about that week-long hunger strike. Lisa's asking about the week-long hunger strike in which some of the Apple workers were hostile and when folks would try to leaflet and talk to the workers.
Yeah, well, this was another tactic that we borrowed from the United Farm Workers, and compañero Mike Garcia decided to do a hunger strike. And we were not precisely outside Apple Computers, but close by. We parked a camper, and Mike, camped there for a little bit over than a week. And it is true. I mean, like I was saying, I mean, sometimes the workers, for whatever reason, they don't understand really, or they do not appreciate, or they, get told a different story by the employer. And so they, instead of supporting the sacrifice that somebody's making for them, they reject it and they are, hostile, right? Which was the same thing with Caesar back in 1970. There were a lot of people who criticized him, farm workers, who criticized him, and did not understand, why is he fasting, right? That's just for theatrics, people would say. But they miss the significance of that action. And same thing happened here, right, with some workers who were rabidly anti-union, and they were hostile to the organizers, passing leaflets to them. But I don't blame them. I mean, just working or taking part in two strikes. The last one, in 1979, we were out for 11 months. I really hated, strike breakers. Later, a few years later, reflecting on that thing, I realized that, it was really not their fault that they were breaking our strike, right? It was just that people were trying to survive. And it's the same thing here, when people, act, with hostility towards organizers that are trying to help them improve their lives, right? Because they don't understand, right, that how this is connected to what they want, to their goals, simply because they workers are loyal to whoever gives them a job, right? Especially people who don't have other way of making a living, but their wages. And so in this case, their loyalty was to Shine Building Maintenance and their supervisors, because they were the ones who hired them. They didn't understand then, right, that what the union was trying to do for them. It was different, right, when they were able to, be part of a labor agreement and have the benefits that they didn't have before. They like that, of course, right? But to me, it's a question of people not understanding, or having their loyalties been manipulated by the employers. I don't blame them. I mean, for that. I mean, not anymore. Yeah.
Thank you for that great response, Alex.
Yes, we are moving on to the last question. I've got two questions, but they're pretty closely related, so I'll just ask them both together. The first question is, how do you know when a tactic is successful? And then the second question, which I think builds on that a little bit, is could you spell out the multiplicity of strategies that were used that made Justice for Janitors successful? And so some of the examples are like exposing companies, organizing workers, changing leadership, collaborating with other industries, right? Like there was a series of tactics and events that were used. Could you really like walk that through for folks?
Yeah, I mean, first question, I mean, how do you know when your tactic is successful? I mean, I don't know if it's just a very simplistic answer, but you know, it's the results, right? I mean, you have to constantly be analyzing everything you do, right? And so if you say, you know, we want to have, you know, 10 people sign representation cards and you only get one, obviously, you know, something happened there. You were not successful, right? So you need to go back to the drawing board and analyze what did you fail to do, or what you did wrong, and what did you need to do different the next time, right? So, but results is, you know, it's easy to, you know, the results are easy to identify when you spell out the results you want, you know, before you engage in your tactic, right? Before you do anything, if you don't have a goal, then you are never going to know if what you're doing is, you know, it's been successful or not. So the other question, can you repeat the other question, please?
Yes, the question is, can you spell out the multiplicity of strategies that were used that made Justice for Janitors successful, exposing companies, organizing workers, changing leadership, collaborating with other industries?
Yeah, I mean, all those things, I mean, I think that one of the first things that we tried to do was to make sure that we were legit in terms of, you know, having workers who supported the campaigns. So doing, you know, the basics, you know, house visits and try to have house meetings with workers was one of the things we did. Then we decided, you know, if this was what was the tactic that was going to work better for the goal that we had in mind, right? So if it was something that had to do with the workers, this would be something that we would organize that included shine building maintenance, right? Like doing delegations to the company's office, marching outside the company's office, passing leaflets outside of another account that the company had. If it was something that we wanted to impact community or the public, the general public, this would be a public march in downtown San Jose, or, you know, another city in Cupertino, which was the main headquarters where Apple Computers have their headquarters. Depending on the need of the day, you know, that was the tactic that we would decide to use. If it was something that it was just more, you know, letting people know what was going on, a simple leafleting or a, you know, just standing in the streets near, you know, Apple Computers with picket signs. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that it was, you know, something that we said we're going to do A, B, C, D, but it was more, you know, what was the need of the day, what the situation called for that determined what was the action that we needed to take next. Alex.
Thank you.
So I just want to point out that we're coming to the end here, and I really regret that we're leaving on the shelf a bunch of really great questions. So from David and Jamila and others, our apologies. I'm going to ask Chava, by the way, Chava, thank you so much for joining us today and imparting this history, and it's really such important lessons and such a complex set of lessons. But I think I want to ask you just one last sort of follow up out the door kind of question is, maybe could you offer a piece of advice or encouragement for today's organizers? What do you often tell folks today about doing this work? Because it is, as you have described really, really well, not full of glamour, not full of big moments. It's a lot of work. So could you maybe give a word of advice or encouragement?
One of the things, Larry, that I hear very often from young organizers is, how do you deal with burnout? You know, like I said, I mean, you know, I was very idealistic when I first decided that, when I left the fields and decided that I needed to become an organizer. One of the things that I thought is, just by opening my mouth, you know, hundreds of people will come to me and will, you know, will do great stuff, right? Experience had taught me that, you know, that's not the case, right? I mean, organizing is something that, you know, you need to take one step at a time, right? It starts with a conversation with another individual, learning about, you know, who that person is, what moves them, and then, you know, making the connection with your life, and then connecting to the bigger picture, you know, observing those individuals and seeing, you know, who has leadership qualities, you know, somebody that you can recruit so they can, you know, start having these kinds of conversations with other groups of people. So it's not just you, but, you know, everybody, you know, working together. And, you know, and the thing, you know, two things that I learned, you know, over my 40 years of being in this activity. One is that in the beginning, I thought that I was doing this for people. But that's bullshit. You know, I did it all the time because of me, because, you know, as my community and the group in society that I identify with goes up, I go up with them. The second one is that organizing, you know, if you're really serious, if you're really committed to be an organizer, organizing is a lifetime activity. That's the only way. When you integrate, you know, organizing into your daily life, then you don't get burnout, right? Then you find ways to, you know, deal with situations that you have. If you're married, you know, my wife was also an organizer. She worked for SEIU, and, you know, we met. She was a volunteer organizer for the United Farm Workers. I was working in the fields. That's how we met, right? And then, you know, when we moved to San Jose, she went to work for SEIU, and then I went to work for SEIU. And, you know, we have 2 kids together. And so, you know, we had to deal with that reality of our lives, right? And so we had to integrate those realities into our daily life and make sure that we cover for, you know, for each other when she had a late night meeting, or I had a, you know, a weekend, you know, activity or things like that. So organizing is not something that you do and then you go home and, you know, I come back to it the next day. Organizing is something that, you know, is with you 24 hours, you know, 7 days a week. And when you know, accept that that's, you know, really what you want to do, then, you know, you start seeing things with a different perspective. So my advice, if you call it that, for young organizers, is that if you are really committed to organizing, that if you're really committed to making changes to your life and to the communities that you live on, then you need to, you know, be serious and accept that this is something that, you know, at least for the next 5 or 10 years of your life, this is what's, you know, what you're going to do. And this part of your life is not separate.
Well, I so much appreciate such honest words and such impassioned, advice. So thank you, Chava Bustamante, again for a wonderful presentation and for illuminating really important part of our movement history. And so we want to thank you. I'm going to ask Alex to say a word from our sponsors, and then we're going to preview the coming weeks. So I'll leave it to Alex, and then we'll move on to the preview of next week and beyond.
Yes. Thanks, Larry. And thank you again so much for sharing with us and spending time with us today, Chava. Word from our sponsors. For folks who were inspired by the session and want to keep it going, please go to the link that's going to be in the chat right now and make a donation. Your contribution will go to develop organizers through Spadework. Spadework is a new national organizer training program to nurture the next generation of organizers of color. So we heard from Jazz and Selena earlier. They are part of our first cohort of organizers in Spadework. And I'll kick it back to you, Larry.
So thank you. And appreciation to everyone involved today, our great interpreters, Ale and Constance, and my co-host, Alex, and once again, Chava Bustamante. And terrific questions, by the way, folks. I really wish we could have gotten to everything. We have another session next week. I think we have a slide for that session. And we're going to be, and there's the Justice for Janitors logo. It's a wonderful logo and historic logo. But next week, we're going to be changing gears a little bit and maybe having a little bit more of a recent history lesson on a really kind of important mutual aid organizing fight in Puerto Rico, the use of mutual aid in building capacity and building movement in Puerto Rico. So a very much more recent history. You'll notice the coming topics as well involve a very topical prison abolition campaign in week 5, and then we get into stories of organizing in both the Philippines and Ecuador. We learned some new things about the United Farm Workers today and that history. We're going to get into a much more fulsome discussion of the grape boycott from insiders in that movement, veteran organizers in that movement. And I'll mention in week 9, you'll see that it says open there. We're asking folks to send recommendations. We're going to leave it up to you all to help us decide what to craft for week 9, who to bring in, who to talk with. You'll notice there it says send recommendations by the end of this month to admin@spadework.school. If you have a great idea for a movement history session, a freedom school session, we'd love to hear it. And we will finish with week 10 kind of bookending this freedom school discussion, freedom school framing with some discussion of actual freedom schools, which were in Mississippi and other parts of the South through the story of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the campaign for Freedom Summer. We're having a SNCC veteran organizer come talk to us, as well as a historian of the movement. And that will be our last so-called episode. So I think until then, we're going to ask folks to continue to engage, check out the YouTube channel, pay attention to next week's discussion. It'll be coming up before you know it, next Monday. Thank you again to Chava and everyone else today for your contributions. And until then, it's on to week 4. You all take care. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.